Hi, Mark and Dan. I'm a long-time listener. My name's Warren. I was listening to your podcast about the 12.1, the Rock Comics Spider-Man, and I'm just amazed how well that holds up. The songs are great. The story was great. Good stuff. Keep up the good work. So make 2020 a good Spider year.
Too many who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. In 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The Amazing Spider-Talk, the Amazing Spider-Talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the Amazing Spider-Talk.
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I'm the founder and editor of AmazingSpiderTalk.com, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals.
And I'm Mischievous Mark Ginocchio, the founder of the Chasing Amazing blog, author of 100 Things Spider-Man fans should know and do before they die, and I, too, own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, but Dan, the annuals don't count.
But, Mark, does Spectacular Spider-Man count?
Absolutely not, except for today, Dan.
All right, I'll take that. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for the 13th and final episode of the third season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. We hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans and collectors as we look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
Dan, this season felt longer than like the ending of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't know. I just something's going on here.
Lucky number 13, Mark.
There we go.
If you don't count the point ones.
There you go. Yes. Well, if you want to learn everything we know about Spidey, why not start by subscribing to our show at the first season, which was about 26 episodes ago, 39 episodes ago. I don't remember, Dan.
A while back. You can also enjoy our show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or your podcast player of choice. We'd love to have you along for our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future. Just head on over to AmazingSpiderTalk.com for all the details about where to subscribe. And on a similar note, at the top of this episode, you heard a message from Warren, one of our listeners who called in to leave us a message about our previous episode.
Dan, is that Miles Warren?
No, it's just Warren, Mark. Don't get too excited.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Maybe he's a clone of Miles Warren and they all take the name Warren. I don't know. Now we're really going somewhere. So about Warren, I enjoyed his feedback to our last episode so much that I talked to our editor, Rick, and we kind of came to a decision that we'd like to feature more of the voicemails at the top of the episodes, like one nice voicemail at the beginning of every episode. If you'd like to have your thoughts on our episodes featured in the future, give us a ring at our voicemail hotline at 9 Red Goblin. Yes, that's 9 Red Goblin. You heard it here first, folks. The Red Goblin is our hotline. That's 9 Red Goblin. And let us know your thoughts. And if we like it enough, we may play it at the start of a future episode.
We are always the trendsetters, Dan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Anyway, in this third season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk, we've been following our favorite web-slinger through the transition into the Bronze Age, a time period that is known for its darker tone and sometimes outlandish stories. Well, today, we want to dive into detail about some of the most outlandish stories told during this transitional period by talking about the first real Spider-Man, I'm going to say a dirty word here for the next person on the show, B title, known as Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man.
Mark, this podcast has been a long time coming, and we couldn't be more excited to start our first coverage ever of this famous title. We really have not talked about this book at all on this show. I think we talked about the Owl Octopus War once, and that's kind of it. And we make fun of Black Cat sparingly. So today we're going to be talking about issues number 1 through 18 of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. And these issues can be found just about anywhere. But most importantly, they're all available on the Marvel Unlimited service.
But Dan, we could never end this never-ending season alone. So we invited our very first ever guest Not like our first guest today, but like this was like our first guest ever on this podcast. And from the third episode of the Superior Spider Talk, just to give you a bit of context there, and the guy who wrote our spanning spectacular coverage on AmazingSpiderTalk.com, it is none other than Tyler Barlass. Welcome back to the show, Tyler.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you very much. It has been a very long time. Very long time.
I think almost 7 years, if you believe it at all.
Yeah, that's crazy. You guys have had a lot of very interesting and exciting guests on this show. I'm not one of those, but I was the first, so that should count for something.
Well, at least we had him before the start of our third season, Dan. So it's not like it's a total bookend to this never-ending season, right?
Yeah, and Tyler, to make a point we can make about the Spectacular Spider-Man series, this might be very in line with your own beliefs, is that, hey, number ones are really important, but in Spectacular, they're kind of fine.
This series did not start off, or the book did not start off great. So some of that B title was deserved early on, but it gets better. It got a lot better.
Well, I cannot wait to get into all this with you as we progress into this show, Dan and Tyler. So if you enjoy this podcast and want to help us to continue while getting amazing bonus content and additional episodes that we never release publicly, go to our show notes and check out our Patreon page and consider joining our team. To that point, we want to issue a special thanks to Jonathan Dickens and Timothy May for joining our Patreon team.
All right, Mark, it's time to get your hog skin, slip on your pony-toed shoes, join hands with your brother Power, and talk about Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man.
With great powers, with also come great responsibilities. Grow forward by trying to kill yourself with your abilities. We're not talking about active comics, we're just talking about classic comics today.
All right, Dan. So, like we said at the top of the hour, it's all about Spectacular Spider-Man today. Excuse me, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, as the book was better known in this period. And just to give readers out there a quick overview of what the book is we're talking about, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, it launched in 1976. It was designed basically to be the first true Spider-Man B book. Now, Marvel Team Up, which we talked about earlier this season, that had launched a few years earlier. Not that it wasn't supposed to be in continuity of Spider-Man, but it was kind of like, it was, more or less kind of like these side stories, Spider-Man teaming up with another hero, and sometimes Spider-Man wasn't in the book at all, like sometimes it was Hulk and another hero. Spectacular, it was like, trying to capitalize on the expansion of Spider-Man across all media and popularity, and it was like, let's give this guy a proper second book to star in that would kind of tie in with the Amazing Spider-Man and the main series as well. And Spectacular was actually borrowed from the Spectacular magazine that Stan Lee had created in 1968, which we talked about season 2, if memory serves. Now, Jerry Conway, who had just wrapped up his run as the writer on Amazing Spider-Man about a year and change earlier and was just minted as Marvel's new editor-in-chief, was going to be the kind of the creative star on this book, with a relative newcomer and brother of one of Marvel's more established artists, Sal Buscema, was going to be doing pencils on the book. The mid to late 70s was kind of a wacky time when it came to Marvel editorial, and Jerry ended up both bailing on the book and Marvel within a couple of months of this all happening. So that kind of left things in a rough spot, and that will be reflected on these first 18 issues here. But before we get into those comics, Tyler, obviously, like we said earlier in our intro, you for a while wrote the Spanning Spectacular column for AmazingSpiderTalk.com. It was one of our first recurring features on the website. This was something, if memory serves, you came looking to write about, and I got to ask you, so what's with Spectacular for you? I mean, what's your connection to the book? I mean, what made you want to actually dive into the history of the book when you were writing for Amazing Spider Talk?
So I know we were looking for, at the time, different pieces that we could have for Superior Spider Talk. And I think I had tried to do something a little different, like Amazing Friends or something, and I wasn't really enjoying that. And so I thought that this would be a good opportunity to share just something I was noticing amongst, Spider-Man, the fandom at large, is that everyone focused on the Amazing title and paid very little attention, it seemed like, to some of the B titles like Spectacular and Web of. During the Clone Saga, there were a bunch more adjectiveless and a lot of different ones. But I always thought Spectacular really stood out for all the great talent it had. A lot of great writers that would go on to do great things, like Ron Frenz and J.M. DeMatteis, and just a lot of different talent out there. There were a lot of great storylines that I think a lot of people kind of ignored because it wasn't on the Amazing book. And then we had Sal Buscema and Bill Mantlo, who wrote a good majority of it. And those are just great talents in my mind that created a lot of great stories. So it was a book that I remember when I was younger, right around the Clone Saga, that I started to collect. And I collected it over the Amazing title right until the big reboot. So it was something I remember digging back, and it's easier and cheaper to find back issues for the title. So I've just always enjoyed collecting Spectacular, and I just kind of felt as if I became the guy to be the apologist for the book and to try to show everyone that it's worth picking up and it's worth collecting and worth reading.
It's kind of funny to me, and Dan, I'd love to get you to weigh in on this too. This idea of Spectacular being the quote unquote B book, because it's, it's kind of like, is it a state of mind, or is there actually something to it? Because on one end, like Tyler mentioned, there were plenty of good stories. There were plenty of good creators that worked on this book over the years. I mean, the book gets launched by Jerry Conway, who's considered one of the true great contributors to the Spider-Man mythos. And yet this book did develop this reputation, I think, for a reason. I mean, over the years, like starting with Jerry, you had creators kind of bailing on it. I know that Roger Stern, who got his first start on Spider-Man writing Spectacular before jumping over to Amazing, he was promised to work with like artists like John Byrne and Marie Severin, and they both basically were getting pulled off the book to do bigger projects for other Marvel books. And it's just kind of funny to me that it doesn't have to be a B book, and yet Marvel itself seems to kind of treat the book like the redheaded stepchild of the Spider family, don't you think?
I mean, clearly they would. Amazing was the bestseller, and they were wanting to put the best talent on Amazing. It had a lot more stability, I think, later on, but early on, for sure, there was a lot of instability. And then until Buscema really came in and became the artist for like 7 straight years, they did go through a ton of artists. But, from, God, I don't know, whenever he had his second stint as artist, but from that point, some point in the mid 80s, all the way until almost the end of the book, he wrote it pretty much, or drew it pretty much nonstop. And so I think another cool thing is that when you picked up a Spectacular book, you knew it was going to have this artist, love him or hate him, which I loved him, even though his style kind of changed later on in the 90s. That was a nice, aspect of Spectacular, is that you had this one artist and it was his book.
And that's the thing. I feel like this book's worst enemy is often Amazing Spider-Man, which makes sense for a B book, that like the main title would steal so much of the thunder. But you really felt like this book couldn't use the kind of main roster of villains as consistently as Amazing did. But when you got a creator that really vibed with Sal on this book, I feel like it would often rocket itself above Amazing. And I'm sure in future seasons, Mark and I will discuss some of those stories that really do stand out, like the Tombstones or the Child Withins, but anything with like JMD and Sal, I think you could easily place above its contemporaries in Amazing. And it's just like, it took the right guys to like kind of whittle away in obscurity doing something amazing and or spectacular even. That's when the book sung to me, is like you got someone on here for a while. Like Roger Stern was doing great things in this book. What's the enemy? He got pulled to Amazing. But you get someone like JMD to do something for a while and suddenly this thing starts cooking.
Why don't we start by talking about this first arc on this book? Because I think like this kind of encapsulates everything that is kind of right and wrong with the concept of Spectacular from the get-go. Because, here we are, like you said, we got Jerry Conway, Sal Buscema. I'm assuming Sal was doing stuff for Marvel at this point. This wasn't his first true work.
It's funny to say Jerry Conway was only 24 at the time this book launched and the editor-in-chief of Marvel. I mean, you know, we're going to talk about his inconsistency and leaving this title in the middle of a lurch. But like, boy, think about when you were 24, what you were doing.
So, you know, Jerry comes in and he brings in one of his creations as the first villain, Tarantula. You know, the book was designed to tie in somewhat cohesively to Amazing Spider-Man, and they do just that here, right, Dan?
Well, sure. I mean, in this arc, we've got Tarantula, who seems to be attacking, I think, across the various first two issues, if we want to call this the arc, the first two issues, where Tarantula is like kidnapping and attacking education figures under the guise of some mysterious person who's blacked out in the frame, and we're meant to wonder who this guy is. You know, eventually Craven comes in issue 2, and he's also kind of on the hunt for these people, or you know, and he's hired by the mob, I believe, or the Magia to take down Spider-Man and maybe stop the Tarantula. But it's all shrouded in mystery. Am I getting this all correct, Tyler?
Yeah, and those first two issues, I mean, they're okay. I mean, you could have gone somewhere cool. What I had an issue with is the reveal of the new villain in the third issue, which was after Conway had left, and we get the Light Master, who I think is a very pathetic villain to start this title out with.
Yeah, so like Conway leaves, and then Archie Goodwin has to kind of conclude this mystery story, which is like the most Spider-Man thing ever, to have someone else have to finish a mystery created by, you know, somebody else. It's pretty par for the course, even if it's not par for the course at this point. And you're right, we get this Lightmaster guy, which is not the best designed character on the world, and he's never been teased before in this series. Tyler, do you know if this was the plan originally? Like, I can't imagine that Jerry would think that this was an exciting reveal for someone that's never been teased. Do you think Archie just kind of had to wrap it up because he didn't know what Jerry was thinking?
See, I don't know. At the end of the second issue, it says, you know, prepare the Light Master. So I don't know if if Conway had already left the book by the time that second issue was published, and Goodwin said, hey, throw this in here because this is what I'm going to do in the next issue. I don't know for sure. But I've always thought that this Light Master, the costume is just so generic, just like this silhouette with little lines on him and little squiggly eyes. And he was just another mad professor from Empire State, which it seems like they hire a lot of bad apples out at Empire State. And we get another one of those in the White Tiger arc in just a few issues from this. So I don't know if it was Conway's plan or not, but it kind of just put a damper on that entire 3-issue arc to start the title off.
I always found it humorous that the third issue's cover says, a mystery revealed. Also introducing the Light Master, and it's like, well, who could it be?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what that issue, the Ditko Lee issue, where the looter is illustrated, and I think the story was Stan Lee didn't know what Ditko was doing with this new villain, and I think like the teaser at the end of the issue was like, this next issue, this is a villain so amazing, we don't even know who he is yet, or something like that.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking about. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's definitely a bit of a, like, if you're going to launch this new title, like, way to shoot yourself in the foot out of the get-go. But, like, Tyler, you're right. The first two issues are really strong, and they do fit in, Mark, like you were saying, in between the issues of Amazing Spider-Man. It directly references what happened in the previous issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And, I think when this book is working really well, that's actually when, when they're doing that kind of thing, when it really feels like a part of the main story. It's funny because, not to jump ahead, but in issue 16, if you read the letters page, there's an editorial note that says, don't worry, we're going to get this book back on track. And it's going to go back to the way it was when it first started with, tying into Amazing Spider-Man. And it's like, boy, 16 issues in, like, we're already admitting that the vision was compromised and that they need to get back towards the original vision. And I think ultimately they do eventually really do a better job of tying this book into Amazing.
Should it be kind of a loosely connected thing, or like, I mean, like I always think of the 90s where, you know, all of the Spider-Man B books were interconnected, and it was like the weekly saga where, you know, the story would start in Amazing and then go into Web of and Spectacular and Adjectiveless and then kind of round robin through. And I have distinct memories as a reader in that time period of almost kind of getting frustrated by that, because I felt like if I wasn't buying every single book, which I know is obviously Marvel's strategy, but that I would like get lost in the story. There are periods where when the books kind of very gently play off each other, but are still their own separate entities, I can kind of appreciate them for their own merits. And I'm kind of curious as a reader of Spider-Man, where your stance lies on that.
Reading these old books after the fact, it's better for them to just be their own self-contained story, because when he's making references in what happened to Amazing, if they don't put, oh, this was happening, and either way, I still have to go to, you know, Spider-Fan or something and see, oh, what issue was this? What was going on here? And this and that. At the time, I'm sure that they wanted more of that. I know that they did. The fans at the time did. And then when they started doing it, I mean, the first time they did what you were talking about, jumping from book to book to book, that was Craven's Last Stunt, right? That's what started. That was the first one that ever did that. And then they started doing it in the Clone Saga on every single thing. And yeah, that's when I first started reading Spider-Man, and that was not a great way to go about things. I don't think.
So back to these first 18 issues, Tyler, is it your preference that one writer writes a book for like 18 issues, or do you like a dozen writers writing a book for 18 issues?
Yeah, I don't know anyone who likes that. No, it does feel very, you know, disconjointed. I don't know. It doesn't feel like a living, breathing book whenever you get a story and then the next thing you know, it's a fill-in story, or it's a reprint from Marvel Team Up, or it's a story that probably should have been in Marvel Team Up, and it didn't work out until Mantlo really started to get in a groove 20 or so issues in.
So Mark, who are some of these writers that we got on this title?
Through the first like 18, 20 issues that we're talking about here, I mean, obviously Jerry Conway kind of started off, Archie Goodwin took over for Jerry, and then we get Jim Shooter gets a writing credit, Bill Mantlo, who would basically kind of settle in as the writer for a while on this book, but he's on a few issues, and then Chris Claremont gets pulled into an issue, and then it's back to Mantlo for a bunch. But meanwhile, Buscema's the main guy on art. I'm curious, do we want to talk a little bit about Sal here, especially kind of like early Sal and how he became different from 80s Sal and then eventually 90s Sal?
Sure, yeah, I love Sal's work. You know, this is maybe the least Sal of his work. Like, it seems to me like he's doing a bit of a John Romita Sr. knockoff, but like if it's a knockoff, it's a really good one. And I think on Peter's face, that's the place I measure it the most. You can see the Salisms like slowly creep in. Is that how you feel, Tyler?
Yeah. I mean, he's very distinctive, and I do agree. I mean, his style changed through the years, but yeah, in the faces, you can definitely tell that is something that really hasn't changed through the decades.
I can tell his style always when it's a villain screaming and there's a bit of spittle that connects the top teeth to the bottom teeth. That's like a classic Sal signature.
Yeah.
You know, like I had said a few minutes ago, Mantlo kind of settled in as the writer after a while, and as kind of wacky as some of these early stories are, I do think there's something to be said about Bill Mantlo kind of embodying maybe the disrespect that Spectacular gets as a series, or maybe to be more polite, the underrated nature of it. Because like when you actually look at like Mantlo's body of work on this book, there's some really fun stuff, and like, you know, this is a guy that I don't think gets a lot of credit. I mean, he doesn't get a lot of credit, period, I think, sometimes in Marvel, even though he made some huge contributions. He very rarely gets kind of put in the echelon of great Spider-Man writers, but there's some really cool stuff on Spectacular that Mantlo penned. I mean, don't you agree, Tyler?
I do agree. So what do you guys think as far as Mantlo as a top tier Spider-Man writer? Do you put him up there? Do you guys put him up there? I mean, you guys are kind of the definitive voice on that, I think.
I wouldn't put him quite that high for me personally. I think he tends to go a little too fantastic for my taste. I mean, I think his like team up stuff is kind of indicative of like a lot of his stuff that bled into Spectacular. And sometimes I feel like that voice doesn't 100% fit with Spider-Man as much as I might really enjoy those stories. I mean, Mark and I often talk about the Death of Jean DeWolf storyline and how we feel like it's like a Daredevil story that found its way into the pages of Spider-Man. And for me, as much as I enjoy a lot of Mantlo's stuff, I never I don't think I'd put him in the upper echelon because I don't know that like his version of Spider-Man meshes with what I think of when I think of Spider-Man. That's not to say I don't really enjoy, because I'm going to go to bat for some of his stories here that we're going to talk about. But that would be why I would keep him out of my like A-list roster.
It's kind of tough because you also have to wonder if Mantlo was handicapped by the sheer context of the fact that he wasn't working on the main book. You know, like he was probably discouraged from using the usual roster, because I feel like when you look at some of the stories that he would do, again, kind of post the grouping of issues we're talking about here, but like something like Owl Octopus Wars, which came a little later, when he did get to work with like kind of the A-listers, like there was some really compelling stuff there that he ended up writing. And you know, I know and again, we'll talk about this in a later season, Dan, like the stuff with the Black Cat relationship, some of it started to get a little ridiculous, but I think like in its infancy, I feel like Mantlo really kind of hit upon something there that, yeah, and he was kind of building off of what like Roger Stern was doing with it initially, and to a lesser degree Marv Wolfman. If I was like really trying to like make a definitive list of like top 5 or 10 writers, I don't know if Mantlo would immediately jump to mind. I could make a case for him certainly in like the top 10, but I think part of it is being limited by the fact that, you know, rather than being able to work with the likes of the Osborns and Doc Ock and, you know, the Sinister Six and all that, you know, he was writing about Razorback and White Tiger and Sister Sun and Brother Power, you know what I mean? So it's kind of hard to hold it totally against him when, you know, he didn't get to use the same cast that folks like DeFalco and Stern and others would later get to use.
Yeah, that's a really rousing defense of Bill Mantlo. And I think you're probably right about the way you put it there, because, you know, I mean, I think it's funny because I read his stuff and to me, it seems like a guy who has a really solid grasp on all of the Marvel universe. Like he finds a way to bring stuff like, you and I like to joke that any Spider-Man story that involves the High Evolutionary is not a Spider-Man story. And like, that's the kind of story Bill Mantlo would tell, right? Because he likes bringing everything into this connected universe. And I both respect that and also kind of are like, get the High Evolutionary out of my Spider-Man comics. When he does focus on stuff like Dr. Octopus, the books are really strong. We talked about the Tarantula and Kraven story that's in the first 2 issues, and then the Lightmaster reveal in issue 3. And then, you know, on the point that we were just talking about, we've got, you know, this story, Spider Kill, which is this Vulture story. You know, Vulture powers himself up again and is going after these gang members. You know, the gang themselves hire Hitman to take both him and Spider-Man out, and that gets 2 issues. You know, those are fun stories, and I actually think really great for seeing Sal Buscema's work. I always liked Sal's Vulture, and I think like it really comes through here. Tyler, do you have any memories of this story?
So the Hitman, I mean, is just a Punisher knockoff, and he's trying to kill Spider-Man just so Vulture doesn't have the opportunity to do so. I don't know. There's just not a lot that I thought was real endearing in those 2 issues.
Well, if you didn't like that, then I bet you'd like issue 6 of Spectacular Spider-Man, which was just a reprint of Marvel Team Up number 3. Mark, that's got to mean that it's essential to our collection.
It's so essential that, I mean, this is like the Amazing Spider-Man annual number 6, but better, in my opinion, right, Dan?
What is it with these number 6 issues? Just reprinting other stuff.
There you go. I mean, what else can you do? They clearly the book was already on thin ice at this point. If they were like, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to pull a Marvel team up and throw it out there as a new issue. I mean, my goodness.
That's a scramble if I ever heard one. But then they kind of like try to swing it in. So like it's a Morbius story. And then they continue the Morbius story in issues 7 and 8, where Morbius is infected by this thing called the empathoid. Tyler, I'm going to throw this at you, and you can deflect. Do you know what the empathoid is, or can you explain that to our audience?
It is a being that feeds on emotions and takes over people's bodies, which he did so that he could bring Morbius back to Earth from some planet that he was on for some reason. And then he is. Do you just want me to go all the way? He's defeated by a
sure. Yeah. Let's. This is so moving.
So Spider-Man has the great idea to bring this creature to a football game because there is so much emotion in a football game that it will surely kill him, and it did. So that's it. There you go.
I think this is the point I was trying to make earlier about the writing in this book is that like the empathoid to me is just like the furthest thing from a Spider-Man villain there could ever be. Hey, but
this wasn't Mantlo. This was good one, right?
Yeah, so there you go. Point made. Well, okay, so speaking of Mantlo, he comes on in issue 9 to introduce his character, White Tiger, into the pages of Spectacular Spider-Man, and the first kind of like colored version of the character, right? Because White Tiger's book was in black and white before this.
Yes. So it was a character that Mantlo created in the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, which was a black and white comic anthology that they were producing at the time. And so him and actually George Perez created the White Tiger character. So this is the first issue I think that Mantlo writes on Spectacular, and he immediately brings this character that he created into the pages of Spider-Man. And I know that people have issues with White Tiger. He's not always looked real fondly upon, but I thought this was two of the best issues in amongst these first 20. I like these 2 issues, and I like the White Tiger character, even though he's dated. He's a Hispanic character that uses a lot of like Spanish double talk, where he's says it in English and then says it in Spanish so that everybody knows that he speaks Spanish, I guess. But I did like these 2 issues. How about you guys?
It's just funny. Like White Tiger is just one of those. The character has such an interesting legacy because he ends up getting used frequently in Spectacular, especially under Mantlo. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. He is kind of a sidekick of sorts over the next 10 issues or so, and then he leaves because Peter isn't going to graduate. He's not a teacher's assistant or drops out of college or something, and then Roger Stern brings him back and then kind of writes him out of the Marvel universe altogether.
Always kind of strikes me because it's one of these characters, and I actually had to kind of remember that his roots actually go back to Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, because it's like I kind of almost associate him as a Spider-Man character because of this run of issues here, which is just kind of interesting to me because kind of like the way he works here, especially through ESU and everything, it kind of works, like it feels organic in its own way.
The White Tiger character itself has kind of reappeared even more recently in a big way, especially in Spider-Man's world. In the cartoon series, the White Tiger as a female now is kind of like one of the reoccurring sidekicks there. So like, I think, this is kind of has some historical precedent. In regards to the story, I think it's an okay one. It's sort of a remix of the Crisis on Campus issues from Amazing Spider-Man, where there's like protests going on and kind of twisted politics on the ESU campus. And I like all of that stuff. I think it gets a little bogged down in explaining the origin of White Tiger and all the various characters from Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. But, there's a lot going on in this story. It's not just 2 villains beating up on each other. There's a classic misunderstanding between Spider-Man and White Tiger that causes them to fight each other. But that stuff is not, I think, worn out by this point in time. So the next issue is really interesting. It's the only issue of Amazing Spider-Man or Spectacular Spider-Man that Claremont wrote, and it's this Medusa fill-in issue. It's really not a great issue, like especially for what we'd expect from Claremont, especially considering how strong those Marvel team-up issues were. This one almost feels like a Marvel team-up issue that was just kind of slipped out of that book and into this one. But, you know, there's some fun stuff here, like Spider-Man fighting Medusa on top of a roller coaster, and he has to kind of stop the cars from careening out of control. But it's a pretty standard, like, superhero misunderstanding thing involving them chasing a MacGuffin. So, I mean, not one that you should, like, kill yourself over. But, you know, it's an interesting thing. You know, we always talk about how we wish Claremont got a run on Amazing Spider-Man or another kind of, like, top-tier Spider-Man comic. And this is it. This is the issue. Number 11.
Well, the one time.
Yeah. Wah, wah. But then, after this issue, you know, because, you know, you got to take a breather before you're going to get to the best story of all time. And that is issues 12 through 15, the Brother Power, Sister Son issues, also known as the ones that introduce Razorback, my favorite character of all time, into the pages of Spider-Man. Mark, you and I have a history of talking about this, maybe not on the podcast. You know, I think we've gone back and forth about my love of Razorback for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I think, only rivaled by your love of the Stegron Christmas story, that, you know, the story that brought us together, Dan. I got to be honest with you, like, oh, my goodness, many, many years ago, I remember you texting me about, you got to read these issues of Spectacular with this guy Razorback in it. Have you ever read these issues? And I honestly at that point had not. So I went out and I read those issues and I was like, wow, this is really insane. This guy drives around in a Mack truck. Like, what is this? And then and I kind of thought you were just, your love for it was kind of maybe a little farcical. But as time has gone on, I've realized, oh, wait, no, like, you really love Razorback in this story. And I feel like for our podcast audience, Dan, not just your Twitter feed, you got to lay it all out there. What is it, man? What is it with you and Razorback? Okay,
so, you know, and Tyler, feel free to jump in if you have any feelings on this. But
not the same as yours.
Okay, well, so I think it's important to note before we even get into this that, like, you know, this, you know, series is 12 issues deep. We're a year in, you know, not if you include the, you know, Marvel team up reprint. And throughout that run, there's been this kind of sub thread where Flash Thompson has been slowly kind of reconnecting with Shashan, the woman that he met when he was in Vietnam, and saved, I guess, her and her father's life from a bombing in Vietnam. And, you know, he rediscovers her when they're out at this, like, I guess, like, Vietnamese restaurant, which would only make sense. She's, like, serving there, but she's not allowed to speak to him. So something mysterious is going on. And throughout, like, a half dozen issues or so, we keep getting check-ins with Flash Thompson kind of getting increasingly manic about, like, what is going on with Shashan? Why can't I speak to her? And we find out eventually that she's married to this guy named Ahmed Korba. And he is this kind of Fu Manchu wearing bald-headed guy. He's, like, very aggressive towards her. And this is the story where it's revealed that he is, like, kind of leading this cult, or at least we suspect at first he's leading this cult, as this character Brother Power and this kind of side character Sister Son, which it turns out is Shashan. So we've got this scenario where, like, Flash and Peter are trying to save Shashan from this kind of abusive husband of hers that they suspect she's married to out of some kind of, like, guise of threat or something like that. You know, and they hold hands and they can shoot light beams out of their chests. You know, it's crazy. And, you know, you read the first issue of this story and you think to yourself, okay, I know where all the pieces are, right? I know all the chess pieces that are going to possibly be on the board here, right? We're going to stop this cult, this brainwashing cult of the brother-son. We're going to save Shashan. But then, like, no, every new issue that Mantlo writes of this thing, it gets taken, like, 10 degrees further into insanity. And, like, this to me is just a guy, like, completely unrestrained in his writing. And it's a kind of similar formula to some of his stories in Marvel Team Up, where you'd start off with, like, a time travel story, And then it would go into like Salem witch trials. And then it would go into like demonic figures from hell. And it would just keep, and then the Vision would show up, right? You didn't know where your story was going to go. And this is how I feel about this. And so for me, the wild card that ties all of this together is in the second issue. So issue 13, you get the appearance of Razorback, who is this like guy from Texarkana, and he lets you know about it, who speaks in the most like lovingly, like stereotypical way. And he's Razorback. He's this dude in a giant hog costume who drives a Mack truck called the Big Pig. And he like admittedly came to New York because he like admires superheroes, and so just made a costume for himself out of nowhere. And he's got an electrified mane, but like you think, okay, that'll be cool. Explain me the tech behind that. Oh no, he just like took parts of a radio and fixed them up to electrify his backbone or something like that. It's insanity, but he's so charming. He's just got a smile on his face. He gets into a fight with Spider-Man at one point just because he's like read other Marvel team up issues. Like he's like, hey, I know you fight all your other team up partners, so I thought I'd fight you just for the hell of it. And it's like, how could you not love this guy? Tyler, did I do a stirring job defending Razorback?
You did. I remember on the website you wrote an article professing your love to this arc here. So I've always known that you've liked Razorback and this crazy arc too. For me, it's just way too over the top. And I love Bill Mantlo, and I really like a lot of the things he's written. And once he comes back to this book, to the spectacular book after Roger Stern left, his stories were way more grounded. I couldn't get into this. It's just too wild, too zany. And then the Razorback character, I'm from Oklahoma, so when we have depictions like this of people from Arkansas, Oklahoma area, it's pretty cringeworthy. So I can't love Razorback like you can, Dan. I'm sorry.
I will say that I have the support of Jason Latour in this. My love of Razorback has gone so far that, we've had this ongoing joke with Jason Latour on our show about how I just won a comic that has Spider-Ham and Razorback eating barbecue together. And it went so far that in the Spider-Ham annual that came out like last year, he even had David LaFuente draw in a scene where Spider-Ham and Razorback were eating barbecue together.
Nice.
And it came to life for me. So now like Razorback and I are tied at the hip. There's no escape for me now. Like I am full on Razorback. But like you're right. This story, it is so insane that like you can't really get invested in it. And I think that's my love of it, is just like, I can't think of a Spider-Man story that goes quite as bonkers as this. Like you get brother, power, sister, son, and you think you know everything. Then you get Razorback and you're like, there couldn't be more. And then suddenly the hate monger shows up back from the dead and he's the big bad. But then nope, it's not the hate monger, lest you suspect it was him. No, it's the man beast, the villain to the high evolutionary that's really the hate monger. You're like, how far are we going with this? It just keeps growing.
And the icing on the cake, Dan, of course, is, you reminded me of this earlier this afternoon before we started recording. What is the title of issue number 14?
It is Killing Me Softly with His Hate.
That is poetry, Dan. That is utter poetry.
It's like Bill Mantlo like heard, Killing Me Softly with his song, like while he was writing this, and was just like, that's it. That's the title. That's the title we're going with.
If you notice though, he really does like to use famous song titles as the titles of his stories. He does it quite a bit.
I guess it's better than My Killer, My Car.
That's a great title, Dan. That is actual poetry, in my opinion.
So yeah, that's the brother, power, sister, son issues of this book. That's 12 through 15. Like if you haven't read it, like I wouldn't tell you to rush out and read it, but like if you want something truly bizarre and you want to kind of get in on my joke, those are the ones to check out. And, Razorback has kind of come back here and there over the years. I believe during House of M, he lost his mutant powers. Do either of you know what Razorback's mutant power is?
Couldn't tell you.
I
Mark?
don't know. Do you know?
I do, actually. Razorback's mutant power is that he can drive any vehicle. Like he gets in the first time, he automatically knows how to drive it. So there's actually a series with him and Man-Wolf and She-Hulk flying around like as like Guardians of the Galaxy, with him flying a spaceship because he automatically knew how to fly a spaceship. But now, unfortunately, Razorback is powerless and he's just a dude in a hog costume.
With electrified mane.
And I think, yes, and I think during the clone conspiracy, or during the whole like Roderick Kingsley is selling people villains costumes, another dude bought Razorback's costume, probably on cheap discount, and has been kind of wearing that around the Marvel Universe currently. You know, Buford Hollis, Razorback, I'm pouring one out for you. I'm a big fan.
Dan, it's taken 3 seasons and 7 years of recording to finally get this moment, Dan. I congratulate you for getting here.
I feel like I got something really big off my chest.
As long as it's not off your electrified mane.
There you go. There you go. So what came up next here? Tyler, we got issue 16. You want to tell us about that one?
It's not very memorable. I'm not even sure who this Elliot Magan is. I don't know what they've done previously. It features the Beetle who's trying to steal something. There's not a lot to really be said about this issue, I didn't think.
No, it's pretty much on the same level as the Claremont Medusa story. It's just kind of a, welp, and here's another issue of Spectacular Spider-Man. Hope you're enjoying it.
Although there is something in the letter section that you alluded to earlier, right, Dan, which is basically like Marvel's apology for, which is probably very fitting after this brother power sister son story of like, wait, hold on, guys, we're sorry that this book is so off the wall.
Yeah. Well, you know, their apology aside, things would get only weirder in the next 2 issues because it's a team up with Angel. But the weird thing about it is, so like Marvel had like a Champions book, and that book was kind of unceremoniously canceled. And in the back of the book, they promised, I think, that in an upcoming Avengers issue, they would detail what happened to break up the Champions. But they didn't even do that. So they threw it into Spectacular Spider-Man. And, you know, we've got this kind of story where it literally starts where Peter Parker is walking down the street and a pane of glass flies out of nowhere and nearly kills him just walking down the street. And somehow Angel is involved. And there's like a character that looks like Professor X in bandages that is controlling Iceman, who's in like a Iron Man-esque suit. And so like Spider-Man fights Angel and then he fights Iceman, and it feels very much like a Marvel team-up issue. But then like half of each of the issues is spent kind of recapping what happened off panel about the Champions and why they're no longer a team. So even here, like Spider-Man is not really a driving force behind these issues.
But historical note: these are the issues where Flash and Shashan finally start to date, and like, okay, not that Shashan is like this huge part of the Spider-Man mythos, but you know, like that relationship that went for quite a while and like kind of peaked during a critical period in the 80s when, you know, during the Hobgoblin mystery reveal, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. You know, Tyler, you know, a lot of the side characters kind of get developed in spectacular, you know, in interesting ways. You know, you've got like Robbie Robertson having like a major story arc here. Do you feel like Shashan was a bigger presence in this book?
Maybe. I know that she appeared a lot in these early issues, and then even further on, I remember there was some sort of arc where she thought that he was cheating on him, but he was really playing like minor league football or something. I think that was mostly in Spectacular. She was around a long time for sure. And I do feel like she popped up in Spectacular quite a bit.
So those are kind of the big issues that we're talking about. I mean, this is just kind of the opening transition of this book. A bit of a rocky opening, I think, as we've kind of found out here. But like, you know, again, Spectacular, an important book in the history of Spider-Man's whole mythos. You know, there's some fun things that happen in here, like the Shashan thing. I like to point out the great scene where Glory Grant gets a job at the Bugle in issue number 2, where like everybody's like, don't go in there with Jonah. He's going to like chew your head off. And then of course, she has like Jonah eating out of her hand, which I think is a really charming moment. And that's very Jerry Conway for you.
Immediately following these issues that we're talking about. So I guess this would technically be season 4 territory, Dan, if we even want to dare to think of it. But there were some interesting historic moments. We had the first appearance of Carry-On in issue 25. Now, Carry-On, of course, for Max Carnage fans. Although I'm gonna lob this to you, Tyler. Do you want to explain the origins of Carry-On and Miles Warren and all that? Because like, I've tried to explain.
Do you want to get into that today? You really want to get into that tonight?
Can we do it? Can we do it briefly? Is it possible?
Maybe if I can really remember. But I do want to point out that earlier I said Mantlo likes to name his stories after songs, and the introduction of Carry On was called "Carry On, My Wayward Son." I just want to throw that out there.
That's actually clever.
Right? The Carry On saga was right after they did the Daredevil Spider-Man team up. And I really think this is where Bill Mantlo and maybe the book in general really started to get into a nice groove. I really liked the Carry On saga and had White Tiger in it as the sidekick. Carry On was like a Miles Warren clone that stayed in his some sort of chamber and aged really, really rapidly. And then when he came out, he was like like an undead clone, but he knew all the stuff that Miles Warren knew. So he knew that Spider-Man was Peter Parker and was coming after revenge for him. I think this was the first time that anyone, I'm pretty certain anyone had tackled the Clone Saga stuff since that original Clone Saga. This was the first time we had seen anything of Miles Warren or really any talk of any of that clone stuff that I remember. And I thought it was a good arc. Also, in the same breath, I guess, right before this, I think the Daredevil arc really goes right into Carry On. And this is the first time Frank Miller had ever drew Daredevil and would go on, to be the most famous Daredevil illustrator and writer.
Definitely of historical significance. And yeah, I do think this is a really cool story. I do like how it plays with the clone elements really for the first time. I sometimes, like, when I try and describe the Clone Saga from the 90s, and, we always kind of go back to those Jerry Conway ASM issues, but like, yeah, these Carry-On issues are kind of also essential in kind of the origins of the story that would become the saga down the line. And then, yeah, those Daredevil issues are awesome. I mean, like, you could just see Miller's talent for the character right away, and like the sonar and how that was used. I mean, I really love those issues. I've never been able to get my hands on a couple of hard copies of those. Do you have those yet, Dan? I know you've been collecting Spectacular.
I do not have those yet, but I look forward to picking them up one day.
Yeah, you probably got to pay a little bit of an upcharge on them because of the Miller connection.
Sure, but like Tyler said, the fun thing about collecting Spectacular is really that nothing really ever gets that expensive. Like, I think even issue 1 you can find for like $30, versus like, issue 100 of Amazing is $30. You've really got to kind of go, higher up in the numbers before you start getting to those kind of cheap prices, if you will. $30 is not cheap for a comic, but that's kind of the end of the beginning of, the Spectacular Spider-Man. Tyler, before we kind of sign off here, do you have any favorite eras of this book that you would point people to checking out?
Oh, there's quite a few. I like that second era of Bill Mantlo. I mean, I like the Roger Stern issues. Those are all great, and a lot of what he was doing in Spectacular, he brought into his Amazing run on Amazing. But then when Mantlo took over the book again from him, I really enjoyed that era where he did the Owl Octopus. We saw him bring Cloak and Dagger, create Cloak and Dagger at that time. I liked the Peter David era, even the stuff he did after the death of Gene DeWolf. I thought a lot of that was really interesting. And then everything JMD did on the book. He had 2 different stints himself. He had a stint where he did it with Bashima before he went to Amazing. And then after the end of the Clone Saga, he was on the book for a couple of years. And I really enjoyed those issues as well.
Do you feel like volumes 2 and 3 have kept the kind of spirit of Spectacular Spider-Man alive?
Volume 3 is new. Is that current or relatively current?
It's Chip Zdarsky's run on the book.
Oh yeah. I have not read that. I haven't really been keeping up lately, unfortunately.
Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your take on it, Dan, I mean, there was a big reveal in the Zdarsky run that's now playing out regularly in ASM, right?
Right. Like that's one of the biggest things I think to ever happen in a spectacular book, that found its way ultimately into Amazing. And so and I think it kind of caught people off guard because they were so used to the book being a B title.
Yeah, and we're glad that you had time to join us today to talk about these books of yesteryear. I mean, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Thanks again to all of you for joining us for our 13th and final episode of our third season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. Dan, what's next? What's next for the show?
Well, Mark, I think we can all agree that season 3 of the show was excellent, but also really long. So Mark and I are trying to change things for season 4 of the show and try to get it out quicker for everyone. We have also a ton of new ideas for the show that we want to implement to make it a better experience. So we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus as we do between the seasons, but we really want to use that time to line up content for the next round of things so that these can come out more regularly and you guys can kind of not bug us about taking a year for a whole season. Actually, I think we spent 13 months on this one, so I apologize. But look, we have, I think, like 15 episodes in this season, so not bad if you include the point once. In the meantime, for everybody at home, keep listening to the episodes we put out during the break because we never truly stop. And keep your eyes peeled for our announcement episode that will detail all the exciting things we'll be covering in season 4 of the show. It's going to happen, Mark. Season 4 of Amazing Spider Talk.
Good gravy. I hope so. Also, for our Patreon subscribers, be sure to check out our Patreon page and your podcast feed this week for a special review of Amazing Spider-Man number 38. We may be taking a break from our seasonal content, but all the Patreon content will continue week after week. So if you find yourself missing Dan and I, and how could you not, head on over there for hundreds of episodes to check out. Remember, for just $3.99 a month, the price of a new comic, you'll get access to our exclusive new issue reviews as they come out. Plus, the guys over at Untold Talks of Spider-Man are going to be launching a new program covering their takes on essential Spider-Man stories that you won't want to miss. Plus, for $10 or more a month, you'll get access to some awesome commissioned artwork this season from Barry Kitson.
Be sure to check out our sister show, The Untold Talks of Spider-Man, as well. Like Mark said, they're going to be doing a new kind of Patreon show where they give their own kind of essentials list like Mark and I did and talk about some of the comics that they can't cover on their more obscure Spider-Man show. Plus, we've also got the amazing Spider Slack community for you to join. The link in the description of these episodes was broken for a couple months. So if you tried to join the Slack and it didn't work out for you, check it out now because I fixed it. And thanks for everybody who let me know that it wasn't working. Also, a special thank you to Rick Coste, our amazing, spectacular, adjectiveless, web of, sensational, everything else editor who cut together this very episode. Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and where we can find your work?
You can find links to all of my work at rickcoste.com or modernaudiodrama.com. At modernaudiodrama.com, you can listen to The Behemoth, which is told through the eyes of Madison as she follows a towering creature across America. You can also find the superhero audio drama Inhale, as well as many others. And you can follow me on Twitter at Rick Coste. Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks again, Rick. Tyler, thank you again for joining us after nearly 7 years. If people were to want to follow you online or read your work online, where might they be able to do so?
So you can follow me online on Twitter at Tyler B, the letter B, Good, with an E at the end. So Tyler B. Good. Also, if you want to read my Spider-Man writing, my Spanning Spectacular series is still on AmazingSpiderTalk.com, I believe, right? And
it is, yeah.
And I still have my writing up on SpiderFan.org. I'm sorry that they were mean to you, Mark, but they are still running as well. They still have reviews for Spectacular Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, all the titles. So that's where you can find my work.
It's a great site, too, if you haven't already been to Spider-Fan before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like kind of the historic resource for all things Spider-Man.
Well, Mark, if we wanted to follow all of your wonderful exploits online wherever
Well,
we do
if you want to see for yourself what you think of my book, you could still buy it. 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, wherever books are sold. And of course, you can find me online on Twitter at ChasingASMblog. Dan, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me online on Twitter at @SupSpiderTalk if you haven't already followed me there. And yeah, I'm always kind of writing about new things and finding little tidbits in Spider-Man comics that I think are worth kind of pointing out. Like during this whole reread of Spectacular Spider-Man, I was posting silly things like Kraven using a vine to swing around New York City. Like, does he just carry vines with him? Or are there weird climates in New York in the 70s? Who knows? So check me out there at @SupSpiderTalk on Twitter. But Mark, Kraven swinging on a vine, as important as that is to discuss and make clever observations about, it's never going to be nearly as important as the motto that is the heart and lifeblood of our show. Mark, what is that motto?
Of course, that motto is, with great podcasts, there must also come the all-new Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.